First of all, to you listening right now, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, may God bless your day and bless your week.
Yes, absolutely.
Because honestly, I genuinely hope your week does not start anything like the chilling scene we are about to explore today.
Oh, yeah, it is quite the opening scene, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, imagine walking out into this empty field, right? Miles from anywhere. And you just, you stumble across a murdered body.
It's just out in the open.
Exactly. No witnesses, no forensic evidence, nothing. The killer has just completely vanished into the ancient landscape. Now, today, we'd expect, a cold case file to be opened and probably promptly forgotten.
Right, buried in paperwork.
Yeah, but the society we're looking at today, they had a radically different approach to anonymous violence. So, welcome to the deep dive.
It's a striking image to start with, for sure, because when we look at ancient legal frameworks, particularly from the ancient Near East, we tend to bring all our modern assumptions with us.
Oh, for sure. We definitely do.
We expect either these, sterile clinical legal codes, kind of like those terms of service agreements we all just scroll past.
Right, the ones nobody actually reads.
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, we expect total lawless barbarism, just chaos. But what we actually find in the text is something, well, deeply complex. And in many ways, it's profoundly focused on human dignity.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking these ancient legal and moral frameworks found in Deuteronomy chapter 21. And we've got a fascinating stack of sources today. We're primarily extracting insights from the Holman and NAA study Bibles.
Which are incredible resources for this kind of historical context.
They really are. But I do want to set a clear parameter for you as we get into this. Reading ancient texts, I mean, it can sometimes feel like a shock to the system.
They can be very jarring.
Yeah, super abrasive sometimes. But our goal today isn't to, put ancient history on trial. We aren't here to judge a 3,000-year-old agrarian society by our modern industrialized standards.
That wouldn't be very helpful.
No, not at all. We want to uncover the underlying themes. We really want to see how these rules were attempting to establish justice, protect the vulnerable, and enforce community responsibility.
And that context is just non-negotiable if we actually want to understand the text. Because these laws, they were given to an ancient people to keep their promised land free from profanation.
Okay, so keeping the land pure, essentially.
Yes, exactly. They were designed to build a society that reflected the character of their God. And this was happening amidst a wider cultural landscape that was, frankly, incredibly harsh.
So it's like a contrast to the cultures around them.
Totally. What we're going to look at is this fascinating blend of the raw realities of ancient survival mixed with moral limits that were really revolutionary for their era.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that murdered body in the field. This is like the community level. Deuteronomy 21 opens with this terrifying scenario of a crime, but there's no one to hold accountable.
Right, an unsolved murder.
Yeah, and the elders and the judges, they're called out to the middle of nowhere. And they literally pull out measuring cords. They measure the exact distance from the corpse to the surrounding cities just to figure out who is geographically closest.
Which sounds very meticulous.
It does. My initial thought was, honestly, this sounds like a modern municipal government trying to figure out whose jurisdiction this is.
Yeah.
Usually so they can pass the buck and just be like, nope, not our problem. That's county territory.
Oh, yeah, that is definitely the modern instinct, isn't it? Just deflecting liability. But the Holman study notes highlight that the ancient instinct mandated here is the exact opposite.
Really? How so?
Well, the closest city isn't found legally guilty of the murder itself, obviously, but they are considered to have implicitly sheltered the criminal, or, at the very least, they failed to secure the safety of the territories surrounding their gates.
Wow. So they can't just look away and say it's not their problem.
Exactly. They cannot just look away.
So it's less like drawing a jurisdiction map to avoid paperwork and maybe more like discovering a toxic chemical spill halfway between two towns.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, like if a barrel of toxic waste is leaking into the ground, you don't just ignore it because you weren't the one who spilled it. The closest town absolutely must clean it up because that toxicity is actively threatening everyone's groundwater.
That is a brilliant way to frame it, actually.
Yeah.
Because unresolved bloodshed in this framework was literal spiritual pollution. The anonymity of the crime doesn't just erase the communal debt.
So the land is defiled.
Yes, defiled.
Yeah.
And the community has to take active responsibility to restore that moral balance. And the way they do that, it involves this highly specific, very tactile ritual.
Okay, what do they have to do?
So The elders of that nearest city have to take a heifer.
A young cow.
Yeah, a young cow, but specifically one that has never been worked and has never pulled a yoke. They lead this animal down to an unplowed, unsown valley that has a stream of running water. And right there, they break the heifer's neck.
See, here's where it gets really interesting to me, because that ritual feels so strange compared to typical ancient sacrifices.
It's very different.
Right. Usually when we read about sacrifices in these texts, it involves, an altar, fire, the tabernacle, or the temple courtyard. But this is happening out in a wild, uncultivated ravine. Why this specific imagery?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, both the NAA and Holman notes point out that this is a highly unique form of expiation. Because it's not your standard sin offering, it doesn't happen on an altar.
Oh, okay. So it's not about burning an offering.
No, not at all. The unworked, youthful vitality of the heifer serves as this tragic visual substitute for the human victim's life.
A life violently cut short before it could, reach its potential.
Precisely. The animal completely mirrors the murdered human, and the unplowed valley mirrors the barrenness of the tragedy.
That is incredibly vivid.
It is. And then the priests, the Levites, they step forward to preside, and the elders of the city literally wash their hands over the heifer.
Washing their hands of the guilt.
Yes. They make a formal public declaration. They literally say, our hands didn't shed this blood, and our eyes didn't see it.
So they are pleading for innocence, asking God not to lay the guilt of innocent blood on the broader community of Israel.
Exactly. And the language used in that plea is really profound. The elders use the Hebrew word pada.
Pada. What does that translate to?
It translates to redeem or rescue.
Oh, interesting, because I've seen that word used in the context of paying a ransom, like buying back a hostage.
That is the core meaning, yes. And the Holman notes emphasize that pada is the exact same root word used to describe God redeeming the Israelites from slavery in Egypt.
Wow. So it has a lot of historical weight for them.
Huge weight. It implies a change of ownership through a substantial payment or substitution. So by invoking pada over an unsolved murder, the text is teaching us something vital about their worldview.
Which is what?
That an anonymous murder wasn't just a sad news story to them. It was literally a kidnapping of the community's soul. It required a literal rescue operation, a collective ransom, just to clear the guilt.
That concept of collective responsibility, that unchecked power or violence leaves a stain on the whole community that actually creates a perfect thematic pivot for us.
Oh, moving to the next section.
Yeah, because the text moves from an unknown murderer out in a field to the incredibly visible, unchecked power of a soldier at war. We're moving to how this society handled outsiders, specifically vulnerable, captive women.
Right. And this is where we really have to anchor ourselves in the harsh realities of the ancient Near East.
Because it was a brutal time.
Incredibly brutal. In that historical era, captives of war were routinely treated as nothing more than living plunder. They were property, plain and simple. They had absolutely no rights, no bodily autonomy, and were entirely subject to the impulses of the conquering army.
Which brings us to the scenario the text lays out.
Right.
An Israelite soldier goes to war, and the NRA notes clarify here that this refers to campaigns against distant foreign cities, not local ones, and he sees a beautiful captive woman whom he wants to marry. So he brings her into his house. Now, I have to push back a bit here, because taking a captive woman as a wife sounds incredibly harsh to a modern ear.
Oh, it absolutely does.
I mean, it feels like the very definition of coercion. How should a listener parse this without just, writing the entire text off as archaic barbarism?
It is a jarring concept, and your reaction is entirely valid. But we have to evaluate the law based on the baseline of the world it existed in.
Okay, fair enough.
So, if we look at the surrounding culture, a soldier could simply assault a captive on the battlefield, right?
Yeah.
Or throw her into a slave pen. But this law enforces a massive, mandatory pause. He cannot just act on his impulses.
So he can't just take her immediately.
No. She is brought into his home, but she doesn't immediately become his wife.
Right. There is a very strict transition process outlined here. She is instructed to shave her head, trim her nails, and discard the clothing she was wearing when she was captured.
And those physical changes are deeply symbolic. They represent a forced severing of her old life. It's a shedding of her status as a captive foreigner and a transition to a new identity within the community.
Which makes sense in that ancient context.
It does. But the most radical part of the law is what happens next. The soldier is commanded to give her a full, uninterrupted month to stay in his house and mourn for her father and her mother.
30 days. Just sitting with her grief.
Yeah. Think about the psychological reality of that for the soldier. In a world that viewed her as a literal object, this law demands that he view her as a human being who has experienced profound trauma and loss.
He has to walk past her day after day for a month, listening to her weep for her family and her homeland.
Exactly. It puts a hard brake on his power. It forces him to humanize her before any marriage can take place.
It strips away the heat of the moment and replaces it with the reality of her humanity. That's actually pretty amazing for the time. And if he goes through all of that, marries her, and later decides he doesn't want her anymore, the exit clause is absolute.
Yes, the text is very clear on that.
It explicitly states he must let her go wherever she wants. He cannot sell her for money. He cannot treat her as a slave.
Because, as the text states, he has humiliated her. He completely disrupted her life, so he bears the cost of the separation. The Holman notes emphasize that this guaranteed her legal protection.
So she's not just thrown back into slavery.
Right. She didn't become a discarded piece of property. She exited the marriage with the equal status of a free woman. It placed a firm boundary on absolute patriarchal power.
So the law puts a limit on a soldier's power over a vulnerable outsider. But then the text turns its focus inward. What happens when that unchecked patriarchal power is causing devastation inside the home? We move into inheritance and family dysfunction.
Yeah, the ancient world was messy, and the legal code really doesn't shy away from the reality of domestic chaos.
The first scenario involves the law of the firstborn in a polygamous household. So a man has two wives, one is loved and one is unloved, or the text sometimes translates it as hated.
Right, a very stark difference in affection.
And both wives have sons, but the very firstborn son belongs to the unloved wife. We actually see this human impulse all the time today, don't we?
We really do.
Imagine a wealthy parent trying to unfairly manipulate their estate planning, or like a trust fund, to favor the child of their current preferred spouse. They effectively tried to disinherit the child of an ex-spouse they resent.
It's just favoritism overriding equity. The father wants to rewrite reality based entirely on his emotional attachments.
But the law steps in and strictly forbids it. The father cannot transfer the right of the firstborn from the unloved wife's son to the loved wife's son. He must acknowledge the older son and give him the traditional double portion of the estate.
And this is a really vital place to look at what the study notes say about polygamy. Because the biblical ideal, which was rooted in Genesis, was one man and one woman.
Okay, so this law isn't endorsing polygamy.
No, not at all. The law here in Deuteronomy is regulating polygamy. It's tolerating it as an entrenched reality of the ancient world, but it is certainly not sanctioning it as the moral ideal. In fact, it highlights the bitter, toxic rivalries that polygamy creates.
Like the stories of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel.
Exactly. You can look at those historical accounts to see just how destructive it was for the family dynamic.
So because that toxic dynamic already existed, the law basically acts as a shield for the marginalized within the family.
Yes, precisely.
By mandating the double portion for the true firstborn, who the text calls the first fruits of his strength, it strips the father of his ability to wield his wealth as a weapon.
That's a great way to put it.
It protects the unloved wife from being socially and financially ruined upon her husband's death, ensuring she's cared for by her son.
It's another check on power. A father's emotional whims do not get to override objective family equity.
But then the text takes us to what might be the darkest corner of family dysfunction. The rebellious son. And the text is incredibly specific. This isn't just, a teenager with an attitude problem.
No, this is much more severe.
This is a son who absolutely will not listen to his parents' discipline. He is described as a glutton and a drunkard. And the penalty mandated is just shocking.
It is an incredibly severe text.
Yeah, the parents have to take hold of him, bring him to the city gate, declare his specific sins to the elders, and the men of the city stone him to death.
It is definitely one of the hardest passages to read.
I have to stop you there because any modern listener is going to hear that and think, wait, stoning your kid? Just because he drinks too much.
Yeah.
Even knowing we aren't supposed to judge ancient history, how do we understand the why behind this without just seeing it as sheer, terrifying brutality?
Well, we have to look at the socioeconomic realities of the ancient Near East, which the study notes really help illuminate. In an agrarian subsistence culture, the family unit was the foundational building block of absolute survival.
So everyone had to pitch in.
Everyone. Everyone had to pull their weight just to keep the community from starving.
So a glutton and a drunkard isn't just someone making bad personal lifestyle choices.
Exactly. He isn't just harming himself. He is actively squandering the family's limited resources. His behavior literally means starvation for his siblings and his parents. It was viewed as an act of violence against the community from the inside out.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
And theologically, disobedience to parents was seen as a direct violation of God's established authority because parents represented God's sovereignty over the child. Rebelling to this degree was rebelling against the very covenant that kept their society intact.
Okay, so what does the actual process look like? Because the way it's described, it doesn't sound like a mob just grabs him in the street.
No, and the NAA notes highlight a crucial procedural detail here. It is the parents who must initiate the penalty. They have to formally bring him to the elders at the city gate, which functioned as the ancient courthouse.
That changes the dynamic completely, doesn't it?
It really does.
It prevents hasty vigilante mob action. Like, a nosy neighbor can't just accuse the kid. An angry town council can't decide they've had enough of him.
Precisely. Think about the unimaginable agony it would take for parents to bring their own son to the city gates for execution. This procedural hurdle basically guarantees that this law would only ever be applied in the most extreme, irredeemable cases.
It's a last resort.
It's a tragic final resort to remove a persistent evil from the community before it unraveled everything, so that, as the text says, all Israel will hear in fear.
That terrifying finality, an execution at the city gate, it actually brings us to our final segment today, because we see another hard boundary on power here. Even when the community enacts the ultimate penalty, the state's power to punish is not absolute.
Which, again, stands in stark contrast to the surrounding ancient cultures. For them, humiliating a defeated enemy or a criminal was essentially an art form.
Right. So the scenario is this. A person commits a capital crime, is executed, and their dead body is hung on a tree or a piece of wood. But the strict rule in the text is that the corpse must not remain on the tree overnight. It must be buried that exact same day.
It's a very firm limit.
Yeah, so why the sudden rush? Why would a society that is willing to stone a rebellious son suddenly be so meticulously concerned with a speedy, proper burial for a condemned criminal?
What's fascinating here is the specific rationale provided in the text. The text states, anyone hung on a tree is cursed by God.
Cursed by God.
Yes, exposing the body after execution was a supreme public humiliation. It was the ultimate statement of being completely cut off from the community and cursed. And by the way, the study notes mention that this practice of hanging a body on wood continued all the way into the Roman era.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is exactly why the Apostle Paul references this exact verse in Galatians chapter 3 when he's discussing the crucifixion of Jesus.
Oh, wow. So leaving the body up was a warning to everyone walking by.
Yes, it was. However, leaving that cursed body exposed overnight would defile the promised land. The land was not theirs. It was given to them as a divine inheritance, and its sanctity had to be preserved.
So burying the body quickly isn't necessarily about honoring the criminal. It's about protecting the purity of the land.
That's the theological mechanism, yes. But look at the practical effect. Even the worst criminal, someone deemed cursed by God, must still be buried.
It puts a ceiling on the state's power to humiliate.
Exactly. You can enact the ultimate penalty of death, but you cannot endlessly degrade the human body. It forces the community to bury the dead, draw a line under the event, and move on. Human vengeance is given a strict expiration date.
We have covered incredible ground today. From measuring the distance to an unsolved murder, to the month of mourning for a captive woman, to inheritance protections and the limits of capital punishment.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But when you pull all these sources together from the Holman and NAA notes, a clear picture emerges. These ancient texts show a society constantly wrestling with the tension between collective purity and individual rights.
Yeah, they were attempting to build a framework where the vulnerable had structural protection against absolute power.
Which really reframes how we view these ancient codes, doesn't it? They aren't just arbitrary, cruel rules. They are desperate attempts to maintain human dignity and communal survival in a brutally unforgiving world.
I completely agree.
And that leads me to a final thought I want you, the listener, to mull over today. We've spent a lot of time talking about how anonymous violence like an unseen killer in a field was treated as a spiritual pollutant that required the ancient community to take collective responsibility.
Right, the toxic spill analogy.
Exactly. And it makes me think about our own modern world, specifically the digital anonymity we live with every single day. If an unsolved ancient murder polluted the physical land and required a community ransom, how does our modern, nameless, faceless internet cruelty pollute our collective psyche?
That is a fascinating question.
Right. When there is no single person to hold accountable for the toxicity online, who is responsible for cleaning it up? Are we just walking past the pollution? Or does our community still owe a debt to restore the moral balance? It is something profound to think about as you navigate your week. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the ancient world. To everyone listening, God blesses all the listeners, and we will catch you next time on The Deep Dive.